phase of the battle was a prolonged cannonade at a range of from 1 to 2 miles. Thanks to the superior speed of the Japanese fleet, Ito could choose position and distance, and the training of his officers and men enabled him to concentrate his fire now on one part, now on another of the straggling Chinese line. His ships poured out a steady shower of shells, whose heavy bursting charges not only scattered hurtling fragments of steel among the Chinese crews, but also had a tendency to light a hot fire wherever they exploded. The Chinese had a very poor supply of inferior ammunition, most of it armor-piercing projectiles, that were practically solid shot. Their fire was slow and ill-directed, and even when it found its target, the damage done was seldom serious. 2 more Chinese ships were soon disposed of. The cruiser Chi Yuen had been pluckily fought by her Chinese captain, Tang, and her English engineer, Purvis. She had received several shots between wind and water, and was leaking badly. Tang knew she could not be long kept afloat, and he made a desperate resolution to attempt to ram a Japanese ship before he went down. As the enemy's van squadron, headed by the Yoshino, came sweeping to closer range with the Chinese left, the Chi Yuen made a dash for the leading cruiser. Even if she had not been half sinking already, the Chinese ship had neither the speed nor handiness to ram the swiftest ship in the enemy's line. As the Chi Yuen came on, the guns of the van squadron were concentrated on her. She was enveloped in a fierce storm of bursting shells, and suddenly her bows plunged in the sea, her twin screws whizzed for a moment in the air, and then all that was left to show where she had sunk was floating wreckage and drowning men. Purvis went down with his ship. Tang was seen swimming on an oar for a few minutes, with a big dog, a pet of his, paddling near him. Then the dog put its paws on his shoulders, and he was forced under and drowned. Another Chinese cruiser, the Lai Yuen, which lay in the line to the right of the 2 armourclads, was now seen to be burning fiercely. On board this ship the Chinese engine-room staff showed devoted courage. While the fire spread through the upper works, so that after the fight many of the iron deck beams were bare and twisted out of shape, not one of the brave men below quitted his post. Stokers, engineers, mechanics worked almost naked, in heat like that of a furnace. Some died, all were in the doctor's hands after the fight, but they kept the engines going, obeyed orders, and brought the half-burnt ship out of action. More than half of the Chinese fleet had now been destroyed or beaten off, without any loss to the main fighting force of the Japanese. Disregarding the Chinese cruisers, which were now badly cut up and firing harmlessly at long range, Ito concentrated his attack on the 2 armourclads. Though each ship was hit more than 400 times, their armour was never pierced, yet the Japanese had some guns that theoretically should have penetrated it. Battle results are, however, often very different from experimental work on the testing range. Early in the fight a Japanese shell had cut down the foremast of the Chinese flagship, sending overboard and drowning 7 men who manned the top, carrying away also the signal yards, so that no orders could for some time be conveyed to the fleet. But for more than an hour Admiral Ting was in no condition to give orders. Almost at the outset he had carelessly taken a position that brought him within the danger arc of the blast from his own big barbette guns. He was stunned, and for a while it was thought that he was dead. The ship was fought by 2 European officers, Herr Albrecht, a German, and Mr. Nichols, who had formerly been a petty officer in the British Navy. Albrecht distinguished himself by more than once going to terribly exposed positions, and personally handling the hose with which he extinguished the fires lighted by the Japanese shells. Nichols directed the barbette guns with a cool courage worthy of the service in which he had been trained, until he was killed by a bursting shell. 2 other white men, the German soldier, Captain von Hanneken, and the American commander, McGiffen, took a prominent part in the fighting on board the other armourclad, the Chen Yuen. Both had more than one narrow escape. Von Hanneken was stunned for a while by an explosion and slightly wounded while at the barbette guns. When the lacquered woodwork of the bow burst into flame and smoke, and none of the Chinese would go forward to extinguish it, McGiffen, who was in command of the ship, dragged the fire hose to the danger point. Just as he had drowned the fire he was wounded in 2 places and stunned by a bursting shell. He had told the men in the barbette not to reopen fire till he rejoined them, but, to his horror, as he recovered from the shock he saw the gun swing round and point directly over the bow. He escaped being blown to pieces by dropping through an open hatchway. Altogether during the fight, the Chen Yuen was on fire 8 times. Most of the Chinese crew fought pluckily, but there were some skulkers. McGiffen tells how once, when there was something wrong with the revolving gear of the barbette guns, and he went down into a recess under the barbette to clear it, he saw a group of frightened men huddled in the semi-darkness, and heard the voice of a Chinese officer saying, "You can't hide down here, there are too many of us already." But he tells also of the courage of others. The captain of one of the guns was killed as he prepared to fire, the man's head being shattered by a shell, and his brains scattered over the gun. Another man dragged the corpse away, took the lanyard, looked along the sights, and fired without a moment's hesitation. Sao Kai, the gunnery lieutenant, was badly wounded and taken below. He had brought his brother, a mere boy, on board for a holiday, and had him beside him in the barbette. The boy remained there to the end, helping to pass up ammunition and apparently regarding the fight as an interesting game, though he was the only unwounded individual in the barbette when the battle ended. McGiffen asserts that when the fight began, the Chen Yuen had in her magazine, besides a quantity of armor-piercing, almost solid, shot, only 3 really effective shells for the 12-inch guns. 2 of these were fired early in the day. In the afternoon, in handling the ammunition, a third was discovered. It was fired at the Matsushima, Ito's flagship, and did terrible execution. Ito, in his report, says that the incident occurred at 3:26 p.m. and that the shell came from the Ting Yuen, but this appears to have been a mistake. The shell dismounted a 5-inch gun, seriously damaged 2 more, and exploded a quantity of quick-firing ammunition that was lying ready near the guns. According to the Japanese official report, 46 men were killed or badly wounded. Unofficial narratives make the loss even greater. One officer was simply blown to pieces. The flame of the explosion set the ship on fire, and she was for a while in imminent danger of destruction. "The crew," writes Mr. H. W. Wilson, "with unabated gallantry and courage, divided their attention between the fire and the enemy. The bandsmen went to the guns, and, though the position of the ship was critical and her loss appalling, there was no panic. The fire was on the lower deck, just above the magazine. In charge of the magazine were a gunner's mate and a seaman. The shell had apparently dented the plating over the powder, and the red glow through the crevices showed the danger, but these brave men did not abandon their post. Stripping off their clothes, they crammed them into the cracks, and saved the Matsushima. Though nearly a third of the men above the waterline had been put out of action, the remnant got the fire under." While the fire was still burning, the Matsushima steamed out of the fight, and Ito transferred his flag to the cruiser Hashidate. This was really the second narrow escape that Matsushima had experienced during the battle. Early in the fight a 10-inch shell had passed through her side, killed 4 men in her torpedo room, narrowly missed a loaded torpedo, smashed up an oil tank, and then broke into pieces. Examination of the fragments showed there was no trace of a fuse, and a plug of cement filled the place where the bursting charge should have been. It was really a bad specimen of a solid shot. If it had been a live shell, it might well have destroyed the Matsushima. It was thanks to the wretched ammunition supplied by swindling contractors to the mandarins that the Japanese were able to fight the battle with such trifling loss. After the transfer of Ito's flag to the Hashidate, the battle became a cannonade at an increasing range. The Chinese ammunition was running low, and Ito, after having had his quick-firers in action for hours, had also his magazines nearly empty. The heavy fire of the afternoon had failed to destroy the 2 little battleships that represented the only remaining effective units of the Chinese fleet. Ito had accomplished enough in the destruction of the Chinese cruisers, and he had no intention of giving their torpedo boats a chance by spending the night near the mouth of the Yalu River. At 5:30 he broke off the engagement. Shortness of ammunition supply and exhaustion of officers and men were probably his real reasons, for the explanation he gave in his official report is not very convincing. "About 5:30 p.m.," he writes, "seeing that the Chen Yuen and the Ting Yuen had been joined by other ships, and that my van squadron was separated by a great distance from my main force, and considering that sunset was approaching, I discontinued the action and recalled my main squadron by signal. As the enemy's vessels proceeded on a southerly course, I assumed that they were making for Wei Hai Wei, and having reassembled the fleet, I proceeded upon what I supposed to be a parallel course to that of the enemy, with the intention of renewing the engagement in the morning, for I judged that a night action might be disadvantageous, owing to the possibility of the ships becoming separated in the darkness, and to the fact that the enemy had torpedo boats in company. However, I lost sight of the Chinese, and at daylight there were no signs of the enemy. There really were no ships of any importance available to join the Chinese ironclads, so one is puzzled to imagine what Ito saw. It was only when the firing died away that Admiral Ting sent orders to the Kwang Ping, the transports, gunboats, and torpedo craft to come out. Only the Kwang Ping and the torpedo boats obeyed. As the sun went down he formed line ahead and steered for Port Arthur. First came the 2 ironclads, then the Lai Yuen with her upper works still on fire in places, then the Ching Yuen, Ping Yuen, Kwang Ping, and the torpedo boats. Far astern the abandoned Chao Yung blazed like a bonfire in the twilight. Ting honestly believed he had beaten off the Japanese fleet, and on his arrival at